Now, in order for you to do your best on the bar exam, it really makes a difference if you have seen the analysis of lots of questions and if you have written out the analysis of lots of questions. And the purpose of this lecture is to do the analysis of these 4 questions in the law of contracts. And these questions have been purposely chosen to cover as questions which test in certain areas that we haven't talked about yet. Or if we talked about it, we didn't do it in depth. These 4 problems, the first one is the Barb stand problem. This is from July, not February. It's a July 2005 problem. This is a problem in which Barb is a real estate person and Stan owns some property and Barb wants to buy the property and she commits fraud along the way. But this fraud was done in such a subtle way that unless you knew the elements that you had to look for, you would pass it, you wouldn't see it. And so that's what this one is about, the fraud, and then there's some remedies. The July 95 question, which we'll cover, the parties are Lab and Disposal Company, DISCO. Lab produces toxic materials and Disposal Company disposes of the toxic materials. They had a contract, and the contract said that Disposal Company was supposed to pick up the material within 48 hours of when they got the notice that the containers were practically full. The problem is that if these 48 hours occurred or fell on a holiday weekend, was Disposal Company still supposed to get it done within 48 hours, or did they have more time? And this was ambiguous in the contract, and that's why this Lab Disco problem requires us to deal with the ambiguities. They also discussed what to do on holiday weekends. And so we have some oral components, and we need to decide whether those oral parts belong in the contract or not. That's a parole evidence rule. So this problem is chosen because it deals with these 2 areas, ambiguity and parole evidence rule. The July 2008 exam, which we will go over, is about a fence that a contractor was going to build for a homeowner. And the homeowner and the contractor had a bunch of discussions about what kind of materials they're going to use to build the fence and so forth. But, you know, they never really quite had a contract. And what you had to recognize in their back and forth discussions is that what they did never really quite amounted to a contract. It would have been a common law contract, of course, because it's for services. And yet the builder went ahead and did the fence anyway before they had a contract. And so we've got a problem and we've got a quasi-contract issue. And then the 4th problem that we're going to do is from the July 96, the Ace Painting Company. Ace Painting Company had a contract with the owner of a house to paint the house, and they had a completion date. And then after this contract was formed, the owner of the house, something happened and he's going to change jobs, he's going to move somewhere else because of his job. And now the completion date that had been set for painting the house became critical because the owner was going to leave town. And so the owner contacted the Ace Company and said, you know, finishing by this date that's set in our contract is now critical. In other words, the owner is saying time is of the essence now. Well, what you had to recognize that was subtle and a lot of people missed is that if you change a contract from one where time is not of the essence, and normally painting somebody's house, you know, you're supposed to finish on time, but it's not time of the essence. It's not a material breach if you finish late. Changing a contract from one where time is not of the essence to one where time is of the essence, okay, that's a modification. And so, and you had to decide whether or not that modification actually worked or not. And there were problems with it. Then the contractor didn't finish on time, and the contractor says, well, it's not a breach of contract because the reason I finished late is because of the terribly bad weather and so forth. And so the question becomes whether or not these were discharged his duty to finish on time or not. And finally, there are damages for the late completion and a quasi-contract issue. Now, again, it's real important for you to be exposed to as many questions as you can, and I encourage you to please continue to do that, and pay attention to the analysis here, and that is the end of this introduction to the analysis of these 4 questions.